Hey, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I was a speaker and a trainer for Google for nearly 6 years. In addition to this, I've been a coach through a lot of my career, helping small business owners and entrepreneurs improve their businesses. But now with ADHD, I've learned a lot about helping other wise squirrels like me. Check out the link at wisesquirrels.com/coaching and book a free session with me to see if I can help you. I have a feeling I can. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. Today, I've got a great guest who graciously agreed to join me on the show for a second time. Unfortunately, you didn't hear the first interview because I buggered it up. And unfortunately, that can happen in podcast land. Sometimes we screw up. And so Dana graciously agreed to join me again for a second run, a second recording. And I know this is going to be really great. Dana Cruz has 2 decades of experience as an ADHD services provider. She specializes in mindfulness-based coaching for adults with 25 plus years practicing yoga and meditation. And we talk a lot about the power of mindfulness and meditation and how that can be applied to help with executive functioning, to help with life. I know myself, I started a daily practice of meditation in 2020, a couple of years before being diagnosed, a few years before being diagnosed with ADHD. And I have to say that really set me on the right path to being diagnosed and learning about my neurotype. And so it's a great conversation. Dana's awesome, and I'm thrilled she's joining me here again. You can find Dana, by the way, at Second Arrow ADHD Coaching. That's secondarrowADHDcoaching.com. I'll include links in the show notes, both on the website and here in your Fancy Pants podcast player, whether it's your iPhone. Well, I'm assuming it's your smartphone. Does anybody listen to podcasts on an iPod anymore? Do people use iPods anymore? I have a couple, but yeah, I digress. Before I jump into the interview today, I wanted to mention a couple little things. One, first of all, I want to welcome our newest Patreon subscriber. That's Chris. Chris with a P. Chris, thank you so much for becoming a subscriber. It means so much to me when you all sign up for this. What it is you can go to wisesquirrels.com/love and find the Patreon link there, or just look us up on Patreon. But what it basically is you are chipping in $5 a month to support me and to support the podcast. I don't have any advertisers right now. I am open to that and looking for good potential partners to work with to reach more people, doing it in a way to promote, products or services that I use, that I believe in. So obviously I'm not going to be here shilling for whatever it may be. I'm here to try to give you the best advice I can give you and making sure that I bring on the best guests who also can provide great insights and ideas for you, as well as you navigate your late diagnosis. So thank you, Chris, for becoming a Patreon. And thank you, everybody else who are Patreons. We have a small but mighty group. And speaking of groups, I also launched a free Facebook group, which you can find. It's private, but you can find it at wisesquirrels.com/group, or just go to the website, wisesquirrels.com, and you'll find the link there to join the private Facebook group. I might make it public at some point so we can reach more people. But for now, I'm keeping it private. And again, you can join the group, but I really do encourage you to please become a Patreon and support the podcast. Thanks. So I'm not big into pop music, and I recently heard Paris Hilton's song about ADHD. Now, I have to hand it to Paris Hilton, first of all, for being interviewed in the documentary. If you haven't seen The Disruptors, I had the executive producer, Nancy Armstrong, on a previous episode of Wise Squirrels that you should look up. And we talked about the movie The Disruptors, which is a great documentary about ADHD. What's cool about it is it follows a couple different families with children with ADHD and parents with ADHD. But what I like about it is it also has original interviews about this with a lot of famous people. And Paris Hilton is one of those people, somebody I would love to have on this podcast too. With all due respect, and I don't know about her background specifically, and actually we talked a little bit about this on the episode today. Dana mentioned possibly some trauma or something involving Paris Hilton. Again, I don't know the specifics, but I came up with something recently as this, as I keep hearing back and forth about how ADHD is a superpower or it's not a superpower. And I started thinking a lot about this. And I did a video a while back on YouTube and TikTok and all the places, how I feel that ADHD is not a superpower. And yes, there are definitely traits we have that make us, incredibly efficient at hyper focused on creating great content and being creative in the first place and taking risks, in entrepreneurship and things like that. There's a lot of great stuff. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to beat up on us. I've been battling this. Is it a superpower? Is it not a superpower? And of course, even the word superpower can be said with a grain of salt, right? I'm not talking about Superman or something. But the Paris Hilton song I heard, she sings about how she realized her superpower is ADHD. And it irked me. And what I landed on is a theory, and I posted about it on Instagram and elsewhere. I included this, by the way. I wrote a blog post at Wise Squirrels about this too. My theory is that the more privilege you have, the more likely you are to call ADHD a superpower. And what I mean by that is if you have wealth and health and you have social status, and the more of that you have, the more that you can say ADHD is a superpower. So for example, if you are super wealthy, and money is not ever an issue for you, well, yeah, you can just dive in and out of all sorts of creative endeavors. And it doesn't really matter if any of them lead to anything financial because you're already wealthy. And so in that respect, you could say, yes, ADHD is a superpower. Yes, I get hyper-focused on my paintings and on my music and on whatever. And that's awesome. And that's great. But I believe that if it is holding you back in some ways, or if you are struggling financially, I feel that ADHD it can cause some struggle. This is where I started this from. I started Wise Squirrels and even getting diagnosed with ADHD because I was struggling with my business. And I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't still struggling with my business. I do. I coach people. Yes, I'm not an ADHD coach, but I do coach people. And I do keynote presentations and I do workshop facilitation. I deliver, workshops and training. And I just had a wonderful client in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, Google, little fledgling startup, and loved serving them. And it was great. But my business has been this weird rocky road lately, this roller coaster of more downs than ups. And I do my best work when I'm working with people. And when I'm not working with people, I'm here alone at home. And that's not where I'm doing my best work, besides the podcast, of course, right? So again, if I had all the social status, I could do whatever I want. And ADHD would be great, but it's not great because I struggle with executive functioning skills, right? As you do probably too. I struggle with focus. I struggle with hitting walls and being blocked when I know the light is at the end of the tunnel and I just can't reach the end of that tunnel. I know I'm talented. I know I'm smart. I know I'm a good person. I know these things about myself, but for whatever reason, I struggle. And not always, but it's been a little longer than I would like. And that's part of the reason why I'm asking for Patreon subscribers. I'm asking you to help me support the show. I know that there's value on the podcast for advertisers, but I hit that wall sometimes on thinking through, who are the best advertisers to pitch the show to? And if you have insights onto that, I would love to hear them. And of course, you can always reach me, dave@wisesquirrels.com. It's not to say that ADHD is not a superpower. I'm just saying that I created Wise Squirrels because I have ADHD. Next year will be 20 years of me podcasting. I've been telling people about this. It's crazy to think. Next October will be 20 years podcasting. Now, not consistently, of course, consistently inconsistent. And I always joke that had I known about ADHD, perhaps my ADHD 20 years ago, I might have started Wise Squirrels 20 years ago. And then I'd be sitting on mounds of Joe Rogan money or something like that. Anyway, I'm just saying that I love podcasting. I love being open with you and sharing what I'm going through in hopes that you feel comfortable enough to share what you're going through. And yeah, I just want to keep doing this, and I will for as long as I can. And so with that, I'm going to shut up. This has been a long pre-ramble, hasn't it? And I want to introduce Dana Cruz. Dana's awesome, as I said. So let's get into the interview.
So I've been a behavioral health specialist and social worker for over 20 years. I'm currently an ADHD coach, also certified professional ADHD service provider and educator. I've spent over 25 years in the meditation and mindfulness community. I'm a practitioner of that. And I work with individuals mostly concerning emotional regulation and stress management.
Yeah, that's great.
Of ADHD care. Yeah.
And your coaching, your company is secondarrowADHDcoaching.com. Is that right?
Yes.
Cool.
Second Arrow ADHD Coaching. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, first of all, full disclosure, this is our second time recording this interview because I butchered it last time and had some technical issues. So I appreciate your patience coming back and going round two. Bing, bing, bing.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It was fun talking to you the first time. So yeah. I don't mind re-recording.
So let's jump right in. And I remember, when we were first chatting, you had shared some of the story of your connection to meditation, or your introduction to meditation through your old hippie parents and your love of nature and growing up. Tell me a little bit about that, and then what led you to heading off to India to actually sit with the Dalai Lama.
Oof. Okay. Yeah. Long story, but I'll make it as short as possible in ADHD style. My parents are old hippies. Grew up in the Montessori community. My mom was a teacher. My dad was an entrepreneur, always starting up businesses. And so, always really encouraged to just, think for myself and do for myself and be independent and sort of follow my bliss kind of thing.
Yeah.
And going into my teen years, I was very interested in experiential education.
Mm-hmm.
So I was diagnosed with a learning disability at a young age. Of course, not ADHD though, because little girls, didn't get diagnosed with ADHD in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So, having a learning disability, it was always do what feels right or do what works for you or, kind of view, which I very much appreciate now and has, I think, helped me very much throughout my life.
Mm.
And so as a young adult, I was interested in adventure camps or learning in different ways. Or I convinced my parents that I wanted to go study in Israel in high school. And
That's amazing.
so, yeah, I don't know how they were okay with that,
Yeah.
but I, yeah, convinced them. And I definitely was always an adventurous risk taker
Yeah.
kind of kid. Um, and so, yeah, that led me to college, and then the pursuit of just interesting education, like whatever was interesting to me. I was like, oh yeah, gimme, and I want more. And so that ended up, with sociology and psychology and religious studies. And then that led me to India after college, after I graduated my undergrad. And yeah, happened to be traveling in India, got a visa for 6 months and decided that I was going to go visit His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he happened to be teaching for 3 weeks, and it was an open public teaching. And so I got to sit down and be with people that were interested in the Dharma and similar information. And yeah, changed my life. It was amazing, that whole trip. I mean,
That's amazing. Yeah. What was it at like a monastery or something like that? Or where?
it was at in outside of Dharamsala, it's called Mikorglanj, and
Hmm.
that's where he lives and yeah, teaches. And yeah, there was international communities are there, and it's kind of a mecca, yeah, for people to come and visit.
Yeah. And I'm definitely a big proponent and fan of his work. No, obviously, I, you'd have to be such a dick to say that you don't like the Dalai Lama. Like what kind of jerk would ever say that? But no, I as far as like meditation and mindfulness, I have dabbled through my whole life, really on and off. My earliest experience in like an actual sitting meditation, I was with a class and I was quite young, and my mom had let me go for some reason. I don't know, but I don't remember how old I was. But dating myself with the reference now, I was a big fan of Starsky and Hutch, the cop TV show, and Starsky specifically, yeah. And I read an article about him, and he had talked about yoga and meditation, and I was like, huh, what's that? And so, and I went and did this meditation, yeah. And so, but I never really took it seriously enough. And I've always been not I always consider myself not terribly religious. And so, growing up, I just never got into any sort of spirituality at all. And if anything, I would push back against that. And in my adult years, realized that, especially in 2020, actually, when I started a daily practice with intention, and that has deeply helped me a lot, even 2 years before my diagnosis of ADHD. So just leading up to that, of quitting drinking in 2020, so going sober and then doing meditation and mindfulness, and that has really, really helped me in my own sort of ADHD journey and life journey too. What are some of the ways that you have found that meditation helps you? You were diagnosed at 40, is that right?
Yes, 40.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I feel like two-part. One is perspective and one is the practice, and the way that my graduate degree helped inform the information and the perspective, because it was really about understanding the mind, Buddhist psychology. So understanding the mind, but then heavily based upon practice.
right.
So rigorous education, but also practice. So there's always these two parts to me in terms of, the view and the practice. And there's so much benefit. I mean, people, I think, have a myth or misunderstanding about meditation or what it is. And it's really just about being present. I mean, there's lots of different forms of meditation, obviously, and mindfulness is just one of those forms of meditation.
Yeah.
Last time we talked about, loving kindness practice and as a different, option. But mindfulness meditation, because people are more familiar with that, really is just about being present and continuing to be present and coming back to continuing to be present.
Mm.
It's not necessarily about like pushing out the thoughts or calming the body or the mind. I think people have a misunderstanding of that as well.
Yeah.
It's more about being with things as they are in the moment, presently, without judgment, or I would say with compassion. Because it's easier to say the positive than to say the negative, right? So yeah, just continuing to come back and to recognize what's happening in the present, and not just while you're sitting or during a meditation practice, but in your daily life every day. You know, we have the opportunity to just pause and just take a moment of like, is this what I want to be doing right now? Or is this what I want to say right now? Or, you know, what do I want? Or what do I need? You know, just taking that brief moment and then allowing for that space and then acting out of that awareness and that compassion.
It makes sense. I mean, I'm a big fan of Sam Harris's work, and subscribe to his podcast and his app. And yeah, I've learned a lot through that app and through his guided meditations and in reframing thoughts. And, you know, he talks a lot about, because I do a lot of presentations and I speak on stages, and I also teach people, you know, presentation skills and communication skills. A lot of times, you know, people are petrified of standing on stages and delivering presentations. And he said something that I found really helpful, which was this idea of the feelings you have if you're scared to present in front of an audience, let's say. And so you're going to go on stage and you're going to deliver a presentation, and you just hate the whole idea of it, and you're petrified and you're scared and you feel like butterflies in your belly and you're short of breath and you feel a little sweaty and all these, maybe shaking a little bit. And the way Sam Harris had talked about it, he was like, yes, like those are all the things, but what are the feelings of excitement? And it's like, well, if you know the material well and you've done everything you can to the best of your ability, you're not dialing it in, and you're about to step on stage to share something of some importance, whether it's entertaining the audience, whether it's informing them of something new or whatever it is, but you're about to step out, you're about to share something of importance with the audience, presumably. Maybe it's that you're excited and that the butterflies in your belly, the sweat, the shortness of breath is excitement. And so it's choosing in that moment, no, I'm excited, I'm not scared, and going out there.
It's our interpretation of events. Yeah. And things are, so, you know, not everything is within our control.
We'll be right back. Wise Squirrels is brought to you by 10X Conference Coaching from Future Forth. Have you ever attended a conference with no plan at all, only to return after the conference to your office and you have a pile of business cards sitting there on your desk for months? You might have some down there right now. I get it. We get busy when we get back to work. We're catching up from being out of the office or being away. There's a whole lot of money that's spent in attending and sponsoring and exhibiting at conferences and trade shows and summits. If you want to maximize the return on your investment of your next conference, check out 10X Conference Coaching. Stop wasting your money by learning everything you need to know before, during, and after your next big event. It's 10X Conference Coaching from Future Forth and Wise Squirrels. Get your first free session today at 10xcc.com. That's the number 10xcc.com. And now back to the show.
Right. And
right, yeah.
And that's not just a Buddhist philosophy. I mean, even the Stoics, you know, had that interpretation of reality where, you know, external events are out of our control, but our thoughts and opinions and decisions and actions are within our control. And it's the interpretation that matters, right? Like you said, like, am I excited or am I nervous? It's possible that you're both.
Yeah, that
and
too.
Just the emotional awareness of that is a whole nother practice, right?
Yeah.
But it is also our interpretation of the events and how we see our lives or how we see ourselves, right? We can be highly self-critical with ADHD, highly self-judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
We can have a lot of like ultra processed thoughts, right? Rumination, fixation. And so, are we viewing that as, oh, this is part of life, this anxiety or this fear or this stress? Or, are we diving into it and getting hooked by it or
Mm-hmm.
allowing it to then envelop us in a way that, yeah, overwhelms us and then, takes us away from the moment.
What are there, like you mentioned mindfulness meditation being a type of meditation. And I think there's also confusion often with meditation where even maybe for me, where I feel that mindfulness is an after effect of meditation and that the more of a practice you can do and dedication to the act of meditating, the more mindful one becomes, because then you can calm yourself and quiet your mind enough to focus on the moment. So to me, in a way, mindfulness is almost like a result of meditation.
Mm.
Am I wrong about that, or right? Or what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's wonderful. I love that thought.
Mm, mm,
I think the mindfulness movement, came into the United States to sort of secularize Buddhism. It
mm,
was sort of easier to kind of like take what meditation was or this particular type of meditation
mm-hmm.
to the masses, to the Western population, to America.
Yeah.
And it obviously it's grown. You can see that it's very popular, just the word mindfulness, and
Mm-hmm.
people just use that. Right. And so, but I think what you're saying about it is the practice, but it's also a result of the practice is a
Yeah.
wonderful way to think about that. Because as I said before, just the awareness itself, just being aware of what you're doing, because we can't change behavior if we're not even aware of our own behavior.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that, yeah, sure. It's not like we're trying to calm the mind necessarily in meditation, but it's absolutely a result. And the calmer that we are, or the more steady or result, some kind of steadiness or balance, right? The
Mm-hmm.
more, again, we don't have those other thoughts, intrusive thoughts that come in, right?
Yeah.
And or when they do, we can identify them like, oh, these are intrusive thoughts. These are my thoughts. I don't have to believe them. These are just thoughts,
Yeah. I had Dr. Lydia Zaliska on the podcast, who wrote the book
Yes.
about ADHD and mindfulness. And
Yes.
she was great. And she talked about that, about like almost like clouds, like identifying like negative self-talk or so as you're doing like a sitting practice, for example, or a body scan or something, you could think of like, you hear a car horn in the distance and you just think, vehicle or car or whatever, but you're not like identifying everything. But then even if you think like hunger, like I'm hungry, I need a burrito. Maybe I'm hungry. I'm craving a burrito now that I said that, thinking out loud. But that instead, it's just like hunger as a cloud rather than
Yeah.
a picture of a burrito, which is a really
Yes.
terrible analogy, maybe. But
Oh, no. That's actually, yeah, it's a great instruction. And she, yes, has a wonderful book. And part of the research that she did was based on John Kabat-Zinn's
yeah,
work. And now it's interesting, that's been going on for almost 40 years. And now bringing in compassion to the mindfulness as a piece of the puzzle is so important, because, yeah, it's like, well, we'll say, oh, we're hungry. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, my stomach hurts. And oh, I need to eat. And what if I don't eat? And when am I going to eat?
yeah,
Right. Like, but instead just being like, okay, yeah, I'm hungry. And then sort of letting it pass like clouds in the sky, like they come and they go.
yeah,
But if we follow that thought and then we're like, oh, we're in pain or we're suffering because we're hungry,
mm-hmm.
then, we're layering onto that idea. That's where the second arrow analogy comes from.
Yeah. Let's talk about that too, actually. And yeah, I'm also a big fan of John Kabat-Zinn. I've been trying to get him on the podcast, but I don't know if he's going to join me or not.
Oh, wow. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I would love to have him on. Yeah. I mean, he
Yeah.
was on with Rick Rubin. Come on. I'm Dave Delaney. Doesn't he know who I think I am? So hopefully, yeah, I don't know. You never know. You never know. But yeah, let's talk about that second arrow, Buddhist philosophy. And as you said, it's right there in your name, second arrow ADHD coaching.
Yes, yes. So there's a Buddhist parable of the second arrow, and in the teaching, it's the Buddha is trying to describe how we experience suffering, one way in which we experience suffering. And the first arrow represents the unavoidable pain or suffering that life throws at us. Like we all experience suffering. Things are out of our control. There's illness, there's loss, there's disability, right? And the second arrow symbolizes our mental or our emotional reaction to that pain or that situation itself, like the layering of anxiety or anger or judgment or shame. And while we can't avoid the first arrow, the suffering from the second arrow is optional. And that's the view, as we talked about before. Yeah. So the lesson of the second arrow is that we have the ability to minimize additional suffering.
Right.
And manage how we respond to life's challenges and difficulties. And it encourages us to have, awareness and emotional resilience and to reduce unnecessary or compounding distress or suffering. Yes.
So would you consider like what we were describing earlier, like with reframing a thought as that second arrow, like choosing it instead of like, rather than dwelling on something negative, like being afraid to stand on stage and speak, and instead reframing that feeling of fear into excitement.
Right. And it's not about pushing it away or denying it. It's about, noticing it, not judging it, not following it, but allowing for it, being aware of it, because, life is full of discomfort and uncertainty. It's completely inevitable, but we constantly are so resistant to it. And this is our interpretation or our judgment, right? That leads to increased suffering. And like, we've got enough to deal with, just, getting old or sickness or, anything that life, relationship, so it's really about, that unnecessary or unhelpful thoughts that are layered on top of the raw data or the raw day-to-day experience of this human existence.
And does that weave into, because you just did a presentation for Chad, right? Which was emotional regulation, the foundation of ADHD care. Was that for Chad?
For ADA, yes.
Or ADA, excuse
part
me.
Of the TED Talks. They have like a funny little, riff on TED Talks, and they're just 10 minutes, and they do, one each day for the whole month of ADHD Awareness Month, October. I did mine on emotional awareness as a contemplative practice, as a part of emotional regulation, which is really what, as I said before, I'm learning more and more each client that I work with each year, that this business, it has, like, I'm so grateful for being able to do this work with people.
Yeah.
And really emotional regulation I feel like isn't talked about enough, isn't described enough, isn't really worked on in coaching, because everyone just says, oh, that's really therapy work. But I don't agree, because again, I think it's a lot of perspective, and there's a lot of cognitive reappraisal that we can do and view that we can see and understand about ourselves. And I think with mindfulness or with awareness and those kind of practices like emotional awareness itself, that is absolutely the foundation of managing and caring for ourselves and ADHD symptoms.
And do you think, like, from an emotional regulation standpoint, like if somebody is trying to get a better, perhaps, like, handle on their emotional or their emotions, in some cases there's stuff that goes hand in hand with ADHD as a comorbidity, like anxiety or depression or something like that, which is obviously something that probably obviously needs, clinical therapy as well as assistance with coaching or whomever. But tell me a little
Yes.
bit about like how yeah how it fits with like your idea around emotional regulation, especially as it pertains to ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah. So just so we're clear,
Mm-hmm.
our behavior is based on our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to deny that.
Mm-hmm.
And emotional regulation is extremely difficult with most people with
Yeah.
ADHD.
Yeah.
And in order to understand our behavior, like what we do or don't do, what we procrastinate, what we avoid, what we react from, is based on our ability to self-regulate, to understand our emotion. And in the emotional awareness practice that I talk about in the TAD talk,
Mm.
it's really just about identifying the emotion, identifying the body sensations that are present when we experience that emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and then identifying the stories or the thoughts that we're telling ourselves with that emotion.
Right.
So let me give you an example. So, like, I'm feeling angry, let's say. There's my emotional identification. And the body sensation with anger is like, I feel this red hot burst of energy in my chest and in my face. I feel my neck tighten, my fingers maybe, are like tingly. Maybe my jaw is clenched, right? Like these are body sensations that might go along with anger.
Yeah.
And then the story I'm telling myself is like, this isn't fair. I don't want this to happen. Or, this isn't right. Or whatever that justice sensitivity, right? That
Yeah.
we can feel so intensely. And so just by identifying those three and separating them can help us then determine just what's happening. So again, the awareness itself and the differentiation,
Mm.
like we don't have to follow that story. We can just be with that anger for a moment and allow that anger to arise, and it'll eventually fall. We don't
Yeah.
stay angry for more than a few minutes, a few hours,
Yeah.
it might arise again, but we notice that it comes and it goes, or it gets more intense or less intense. And you can do this even with a really, like excitement or joy or any emotion that you want to move towards. Just the emotional awareness of identifying what does it feel like in the body. And then again, what's the story that goes along with this emotion?
Yeah. So when you're coaching a client, let's say like it's like a person running a business or um, what would that look like in a so they might be stressed out or angry or what have you. Do you just kind of walk them through a meditation, or do you or guide them on a meditation, or do you just walk them through the steps of like maybe reframing and rethinking that to regulate those emotions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes, yeah, we do practice and meditation type practices in the
Mm-hmm.
coaching session. Um, Sometimes I just ask them to stop and start the identification process.
Mm.
And that can be just to say it out loud. Sometimes it's helpful in determining then, is there something I need to do with this? Or is this something I need? Or do I want to change my behavior? It just really depends on that person's perspective, how they're talking about themselves. Is it the shoulding? Are they shoulding
Yeah.
themselves?
Yeah.
And that word is like a not allowed
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in our coaching session. So I'm like, okay, so I put a mirror up and I say, hey, just heard you say should.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it that you want to do this? Is it that there's this expectation culturally or gender wise, or what is it that, you feel like you want in this moment? What is it that you need? And so just processing through that too is sometimes helpful in the coaching realm, saying it out loud, processing through it.
Yeah.
It's part of that self speech that Dr. Barkley talks about in terms of executive functioning. So,
Mm.
um, all of the, executive functioning skills need to kind of be online in order to emotionally regulate. And that's
Yeah.
difficult enough one by one, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so it's kind of like that orchestra of it has to work in the just the right way, just the right tone, just the right tempo. in just the right order to emotionally regulate. So it's really just about understanding ourselves, increasing that, again, self-awareness and compassion,
Yeah.
and then working with whatever arises in the moment.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I find it interesting. I had a guest on recently, and he was talking about the value of verbal of actually just saying it out loud, and how
Mm-hmm.
we tend to that tends to serve us well when we actually just speak out loud. It's probably part of the reason why, like I've talked about it on the show before, how, I'll put in my AirPods and walk down the street and I'll just talk to myself. I'll record a voice memo. So I'll actually be recording it. So I can like go back to it later, but I'll record a voice memo to myself and talk to myself about whatever challenge I have. So maybe the crazy madman, walking down the street going blah, 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 talking to himself back in the day was onto something. Or maybe I'm now that madman. That's also a possibility. But I find that just saying it out loud really does help with that. I've actually recently started talking a little bit more with Chat GPT, being the nerd that I am, and have found that to be interesting, where I'm thinking through like business ideas and challenges I'm having. And so instead of recording the audio to myself, I actually ask Chat GPT. I use GPT-4, so I'm geeking out here for a sec, and I'll talk to the app and she will answer me and I'll have a conversation and she'll give me a bunch of ideas. And then I'll say, well, this is too much. Like I'm overwhelmed. And she's like, well, would you like me to create a checklist for you? And I'm like, what? Oh. And so she makes a checklist. And
that's great.
Yeah. But of course, I mean, there's plenty of danger and I don't advise this for everybody if you're not super savvy with the dangers of such devices and things. I think, there was just a story of a child, unfortunately, committing suicide after talking with an AI.
Oh.
Yeah, that was just in the news. Yeah. It wasn't Chat GPT, it was a different AI, but yeah, so there's a lot of danger there too. So yeah,
but
so
for you to acknowledge how you were feeling in the moment with Chat GPT, that's great, Dave.
Yeah.
I mean, you said like, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and then she suggested the checklist. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That you identified your emotion and that she had, something that might be helpful. Because that's also something that I do with my clients is, okay, so now that we know what's happening, now that we're aware of what's happening, so this is like an obstacle maybe. And so what tools or strategies do we use in order to help us through this obstacle?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know for me personally, and I probably for everybody, I expect with ADHD, is overwhelm is a common thing. And what happens is it's like, the analysis paralysis cliche or whatever. But I think there is something to that, where you get so overwhelmed, not with options to solve a problem, let's say. And there's all these different, I was just talking about this with my therapist actually, about like, having all these different doors to choose from, and then deciding, okay, I'll walk into this door, but like, how far do I walk before giving up on whatever business idea it is, let's say, and realize like, okay, this isn't going to work. So back out and go choose a different door. Or do I like keep walking down that hall until I reach some success or something? I'm totally off.
I actually was having this. No, it's great. I was having this conversation with a client as well. Like, how do you balance the, extremes, right? Because we can either be sort of overstimulated or understimulated. So it's like we can get overwhelmed, or sort of we're, on the couch, not moving and binge watching. I had another client that told me she just binge watched Game of Thrones. I was like, wow, for the whole weekend. Okay.
Wow.
All right, let's talk about that. Yeah. And so how do we know? Sometimes we get so deep in something, we can be sort of hyper focused, and then we miss the red flags, or we miss the like exit door, right? Or there's something there that's kind of holding us in. Yeah. But then also, how do we also know when it's like too many options isn't really helpful to us, or isn't really beneficial to us, or we keep jumping, from thing to thing? Is that more the shiny object, or is that more, impulse Or is it, this is just ADHD and this we're going with what interests us or what our strengths are. So how do we find that balance in between?
Yeah. And I feel like I'm on the cusp of something in my career that's going to be like next level. Like I'm excited about what's coming because with now knowing what I know about myself and receiving treatment and talking to experts and amazing people like yourself on the podcast, and learning about this stuff has helped me understand myself better. Like even the overwhelm point was something brought up by a therapist who brought it up, and I'm like, wait, what? And also just like reading books and learning from folks about this stuff, that it's helped me kind of realize that, like, now that I know this stuff, dare I say, I'm not going to say superpower. I've been on this like superpower thing lately where like I posted about it a couple places on social. And I've come up with a whole theory on the superpower phenomenon, which is,
tell me about it.
Yeah. So you can comment or agree, disagree. But my thinking is that if you can picture like a graph, I actually wrote a blog post about this for Wise Squirrels. I can't remember if I published it yet, but after seeing Paris Hilton's recent video and her song about ADHD, it occurred to me that those who say, because there's always this argument of like, it's a superpower, it's not a superpower. Like Russ Barkley will be like, it's not a superpower, it's not, but then others will say, oh, it is. My theory is that the higher, the more likely you say ADHD is a superpower, the more privilege you have. So, and that can be everything from wealth to health to looks to social status. But the better you're off you are in the world, from a status sort of level, the more you can pontificate that ADHD is a superpower, because you have complete freedom to do whatever you want. And that's a beautiful thing for an ADHDer, to just dive into all sorts of different creative outlets. But when you're like me and you're like, oh, I've got not one, but two college tuitions to help pay for and all the other things to consider. For me, it's like, it's not a superpower. Like, it's holding me back from things. And it's not to say I hate ADHD or I hate myself or anything like that. I don't mean that, but I just mean that the more, like, you think of a Paris Hilton level of privilege, and hell yeah, that's why she's got a whole music video about it being a superpower. Thoughts?
Well, I've also, that's very interesting. Privilege could definitely be part of it. I'm not sure it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's also just a lot of like encouragement and support, that someone would need to thrive. Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily take and maybe you mean more than just financial privilege, but also I heard that Paris Hilton went through a really difficult time at a treatment facility that was not above bar, and she had some really awful experiences, physical abuse, emotional abuse, things like that. So, we're such complex beings, and I think more than the conversation about superpower, I'm kind of interested in the conversation about neurodivergence or neurodiversity, because I think that's coming up a lot in the ADHD community.
Sure.
And I've been reading more about that, trying to understand, okay, so we're divergent thinkers. Yes, we're neurodiverse. Although there are still so many people that struggle and feel that this is a disability and feel that this is a disorder. And there's such a huge spectrum. And I think I'm beginning to understand that the neurodivergent community also acknowledges that.
Yeah.
That there can be both, sort of. Yes, there can be positives, great positives about the way we think, or what we, the kind of opportunities that we might have because of how our brain works.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if we didn't have these struggles, where would we be education wise, or where would we be in life or in relationships?
Yeah.
And so I think going back to what you said about therapy is like, both things can be true. in
Yeah.
terms of how to think about it and your perspective. And I I always encourage, clients to also work with a therapist alongside of coaching, because
Sure. Yeah.
that can be some deep, there's so much criticism from others and from ourselves, and so much trauma that can happen as individuals, you know, from childhood. Really difficult to process. And if we're not also doing that work along with coaching, then, we're going to get stuck at certain places.
Yeah. And I do find there's this connection too between trauma uh, and ADHD, and in that, not to say that, because I think it was like Dr. like Gabor Mate or whatever his name is,
Mm-hmm.
who,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, while he might do a lot of great stuff, I believe, Russell Barkley actually like tore him apart because he had talked about, he claims that trauma, I'm paraphrasing because I don't know, I don't have it in front of me, but he basically claims that like trauma can cause ADHD, and it's not accurate. It's
Mm-hmm.
false, unless it's like a head trauma of some sort, and that's very
Mm-hmm.
slim. But typically, I do find there's an interesting connection between being raised, like growing up with undiagnosed ADHD. Chances are pretty likely that you've experienced some sort of trauma through your life, whether it's through just, to your point about teachers calling you an idiot or all sorts of different stuff. And I've been there. And then you're also prone to addiction and things like that. And I've dabbled with that at a younger age, with undiagnosed ADHD. And then what you start to realize is it throws your life off a little bit. And then you start to realize that, oh, wait, like you also probably suffered at the hands of one or both of your parents in some sort of capacity of trauma, because they probably were, there's like a very high likeliness that one of your parents or both had ADHD as well, because of how hereditary it is. And so it starts to make you realize like, oh, okay. I mean, for me personally, like, I mean, my dad's dead and my mom's still kicking and would take us both in a bar fight. Stiff British, stiff upper lip, 88 years old and doing great.
Wow.
But it does make me a little more empathetic towards reflecting on our relationship and my dad's relationship with me too, because my spidey sense would tell me both of them probably had ADHD or have.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I do feel like we all kind of do our best with the, information that we have, with the tools that we know,
sure. Yeah.
With our experiences. And, I believe in sort of the basic goodness, right, of humanity, and, and that we all are genuinely, want to be kind and compassionate and understanding. And, but of course, trauma and complex trauma. And of course, ADHD itself can be a complex trauma part of diagnosis. And, the sort of death of a thousand paper cuts kind of idea, it's so complex. And I think where we get stuck often is identifying with all of those things, making it me. Like, I am my ADHD even, or I am my disability, or I am my anxiety.
Yeah.
And that's part of that view and perspective as well. Can we see that, yes, we experience anxiety, and yes, we have fears, and those are very real, and we've experienced trauma, and that also we are these incredible, inventive, dynamic, a million different words, right? Of all the amazing, wonderful, creative, out of the box thinkers, divergent thinkers, that is also part of who we are. And so that understanding of this is what's true versus, is this just in my mind? Is this just my thoughts, right? Am I trying to convince myself of something that's actually not real or not true all the time?
And it's part of the love I have for connecting with folks like this and doing this podcast, because, when I joke that I came out of the mental health closet, as it were, when I went on Facebook after being diagnosed. I said, "Hey, everybody, guess what? I have ADHD." But I got all these messages from friends from my like punk rock days of like going to shows and things like that. And
Mhm.
a lot of friends from back then started messaging me saying basically, like, you wouldn't believe how many of us also have
Yeah.
ADHD or probably have ADHD. And it makes so much
Yeah.
sense, talking about the creativity, and, like it's just so rampant in artists and
Hmm.
music. And,
Hmm.
from a punk rock background, certainly there are
Yeah.
so many songs now that I think of and like War Inside My Head by Suicidal Tendencies, or
Yeah.
My War by Black Flag, or all these songs start popping into
Absolutely.
my head. Hyperactive Child by Jello by or Dead Kennedys. All those lyrics are like, oh my god, like all of these people had or have ADHD. Like Jello Biafra's come out and said he has ADHD. Henry
Hmm.
Rollins has said he has ADHD.
Hmm.
Ian Mackay from Minor Threat said he is, and Fugazi says
Hmm.
he has ADHD. I think
Yeah.
like it's incredible. But I mean, so much of the soundtrack of my life, and I believe yours too. I think we talked a little bit about
Yes.
that last time, comes from artists who with either treated or untreated or undiagnosed even
Mhm.
ADHD. What are your thoughts with that connection?
Yeah, it's amazing, right? And I think like I've always connected. That's part of the community that we've talked about, right? The ADHD community is like
Yeah.
when you see someone that's like you or you hear something that resonates in this way, there's this deep sense of connection.
Mm,
And that community, that ADHD community is like, it's so present, right? Where we just feel like we can be ourselves. We can be our true, authentic, genuine selves. And we don't have to mask or be something different or be more typical. And
yeah.
I think that's why, yeah, we connect with each other. We connect with the music. We connect with, yeah, friends and relationships. And so many people in my life also have ADHD, and of course my family. So it's like, that's what I grew up with too. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, there are these like, say it how it is, like in your face kind of, Jewish family, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very philosophical at the table, like arguing is this just a part of conversation,
Mhm.
kind of way. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it talks to our deep sense of connection with each other and community. Yeah.
I once had a boss. You mentioned Jewish family. I once had a boss who was Jewish, and I gave him I said something. I gave him this guilt about something. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, man. I said, it's this Irish Catholic guilt. And he's like, Dave, I'm Jewish and I have a mother. And I was like, oh, touche. I was like, because they're like the Irish Catholic guilt is pretty extreme. It's pretty high on
Yeah.
the level,
Yeah.
but like Jewish mom, you win. All right. But
Yeah.
you get the
No,
latkes
it's
and
part of it.
blentzes. And so that makes everything better. So, and oi. I mean, oi is like the best word. Like if for like I've tried to borrow and use oi as much as possible because like oi kavalt, oi kave, oi. Like there's like so many ois, man. I
That's
love it.
great.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Let folks know how to get a hold of you and learn more about what you do. And yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Dave. It was a pleasure talking
Yeah.
to you. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I'm so glad we were able to connect and thank you for having me. Yeah, my website is secondarrowADHDcoaching.com. You can sign up for, free consultation or just get some resources if you're interested in, information, podcasts other than Dave's wonderful podcast, articles, organizations that, yeah, are just helpful tools and strategies to yeah, help us with our ADHD.
All right, Daniel. Well, thank you so much. This has been fun.
Thank you, Dave.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, would you do me a favor? Would you visit wisesquirrels.com/love? That's where you'll find links to become a Patreon by supporting the show. You can advertise on the show. You can also record an audio comment, question, or even email me a question that I can include in an upcoming episode. And you can even leave a little review to let me know how I'm doing. There's more there. wisesquirrels.com/love. Hey, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I was a speaker and a trainer for Google for nearly 6 years. In addition to this, I've been a coach through a lot of my career, helping small business owners and entrepreneurs improve their businesses. But now with ADHD, I've learned a lot about helping other wise squirrels like me. Check out the link at wisesquirrels.com/coaching and book a free session with me to see if I can help you. I have a feeling I can.